Hello everyone, I'm Brian. Today I'm reacting to Transcending the Mind, Abiding in Pure Awareness, the Psychology of Samadhi 4. Alright, so this, I believe, is the last one of this particular series that Swami Tadatmananda has. So let's go ahead and get started.
Samadhi, which is the ultimate goal of yogic meditation, is utterly unlike the preceding 7 angas, or limbs of yoga, taught by Rishi Patanjali in his Yoga Sutras. Those angas, especially dharana, concentration, and dhyana, meditation, have to be practiced with tremendous effort to completely prepare your mind to reach samadhi. All that effort is necessary because, according to Patanjali, you have to fully restrain all the activities of your mind, all your vrittis, which is a huge challenge. Ironically, that very effort actually becomes an obstacle when you finally approach the state of samadhi. Why? Because such effort supports and sustains the activities of your mind. The fact is, you can't really practice samadhi. It's the state you arrive at through your skillful, dedicated practice of all 7 preceding angas. When you practice those angas with enough intensity and for enough time, a kind of inner momentum is produced, a mental drive or force that can carry you along towards samadhi without any deliberate, willful effort whatsoever. Let me explain. Suppose a child turns her bicycle upside down and spins its front wheel with her hand. After she removes her hand, the wheel continues to spin on its own for a while, due to its momentum. And the wheel spins even longer when she rotates it more forcefully. That's a good example of how your intense effort practicing the first 7 angas of yoga can build up enough mental momentum to reach the effortless state of samadhi. Here's how it works. Suppose your alambana, your chosen object of meditation, is the sacred syllable Om. Through the practice of dharana, concentration, your mind will eventually be able to remain steadfastly engaged in mental repetition. Om, 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 without any distractions or disruptions whatsoever. That unbroken flow of identical thoughts or vrittis is exactly how Patanjali defines dhyana, as we saw in the previous part of this series. Next, through the practice of dhyana meditation, the flow of mantras becomes deeply established in your mind. Eventually, the syllable Om will begin to arise spontaneously, without any effort at all. Instead of deliberately reciting Om, 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 you'll be able to effortlessly observe that repetition in your mind as it continues spontaneously. This transition from deliberate repetition to spontaneous, effortless repetition is the result of the momentum gained through intense practice of dharana and dhyana.
Strange. I was actually thinking about that. Like I was thinking, if I were to do meditation, I guess I do Om, but I wouldn't just say the word Om. I go Om, and then that vibration at the end there. I don't know if that's right or not, but to me, it's a very consistent sound. And then I was thinking, it's like, well, doing the sound is a bit of a distraction in itself, but it helps perhaps get you started in that momentum that he's talking about. Then maybe next time, or maybe after a little bit of the sound, you kind of mimic it in your head. That way it's not no longer a physical action. And well, it's both a physical and a thought, you saying and then you thinking about it and saying it at the same time. You remove one of them, the verbal communication of it, because the thought, to me, I guess the thought might be the last thing that goes. So eventually it's just a thought that reverberates in your mind to eventually perhaps disappearing. That was just my thought a little bit earlier, and I hadn't realized he was going to go into that, that's the reason why I made that weird cocking with my head, I think.
According to psychologists, certain kinds of intense activity can produce a similar state of spontaneous, effortless action. They call it entrainment of the mind, or the state of flow. Athletes call it being in the zone. Musicians aptly call it getting into the groove. And just like athletes and musicians eventually fall out of that state, during meditation you will eventually fall out of that state of spontaneous, effortless repetition. That occurs when the momentum developed by your preceding practice of dharana and dhyana gradually gets exhausted. The spontaneous mental flow, Om, 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 will eventually weaken and stop, just like the wheel of the girl's bicycle will eventually slow down and stop. Yet, she can make the effort to spin the wheel with her hand once again, and in the same way, you can return to the deliberate, willful practice of dharana and dhyana until you accumulate enough momentum for the effortless repetition of Om to resume.
I do wonder, is it possible to stay in that state? I know he probably hasn't explained completely, but just kind of curious. Like, I guess a great example, going back to the girl on the bike, where she's having to constantly start it up, then it'll go on its own, then it'll slow down due to friction. But maybe he'll explain, hopefully later on, where when you get past to a certain point, you spin it once, and now it becomes frictionless. So it just constantly spins on its own. Was it like the first law of motion? Something that stays in constant motion until acted upon by another force or something like that? Or I don't know, third law? I can't remember. I don't remember the laws of... Anyway, but you understand my point. Looks like a number on a dude's head.
Meditators in the state of effortless action, along with athletes in the zone and musicians in the groove, all observe a surprising event. They experience the disappearance or absence of the ego, what psychologists call reflective awareness or self-consciousness.
Really?
In the first part of the series, we called it ahankara, the I thought, your sense or feeling of individuality. Ego is the fourth kind of vritti, in addition to your thoughts, emotions, and sensations. Previously, we discussed how you can recognize the ego by its disappearance when you get deeply absorbed in some activity, like listening to your favorite music and feeling yourself getting lost in the powerful experience. For meditators, it's important to distinguish two different aspects of the ego. When you feel like the doer or agent of some kind of activity, that is the aspect called karta, the doer. On the other hand, when you feel like you're merely an observer or experiencer of something, that is the aspect called bhokta, the experiencer. So your ego can produce the feeling of being a doer, an experiencer, or both. Let me explain. Before getting lost in your favorite music, you feel that I am listening. That feeling is the karta, the doer, the first of the two aspects of your ego. Later, when you're completely lost in a particularly mesmerizing piece of music, the I am of the feeling I am listening disappears. The karta, the agent of the act of listening, is absent. In the same way, in meditation, you often feel that I am meditating, or I am sitting, I am concentrating my attention, or I am bringing my mind back after it wandered.
Oh, I was about to I was about to ask. Like, I wonder if um I was going to ask literally if the phrase that I was lost in my mind, an example of one, and I'm bringing my mind back after I wandered. Basically, you're lost in your mind.
In each case, the feeling that I am doing something indicates the presence of your ego as the agent of action, karta. But when your practice of dharana and dhyana creates enough momentum to continue spontaneously without willful effort, then the I am of the feeling I am meditating disappears. The karta, the agent of the act of meditation, is absent. The feeling of being a meditator has vanished. For me, and perhaps for many other meditators, the disappearance of the karta produces a feeling of utter contentment and total fulfillment.
You know, he's answering a lot of my questions that I thought about. Like I was going to ask him. I was thinking at the very beginning of this. I think right before recording was if I were to ever meet him, I think I was going to ask him, what does it feel like to be enlightened? What's the feeling that you get? And I have a feeling this is the answer right here. Utter contentment and total fulfillment.
Why? Because in the absence of the doer, there's nothing to be done, no unfinished business to accomplish, no duties to fulfill. That state is called krita krityata, literally a state in which everything that needs to be done is done. It's like discovering that your to-do list for your entire life has every single item already checked off. This state of perfect satisfaction arises due to the disappearance of the karta, the doer. It's probably included in the 10 kinds of samadhi described by Patanjali. But even in this state, the activities of your mind are not yet completely restrained. Even after the karta disappears, your ongoing practice of dhyana continues to produce an unbroken flow of vrittis, like Om, Om, Om. To go beyond dhyana and completely restrain all your vrittis, you have to not only let go of willful effort, you have to let go of your alambana, your object of meditation, as well. And alambana is a tool you use to quiet and concentrate your mind. When you're done using a screwdriver or a measuring cup, you put it down. In the same way, when your mind is fully concentrated, you have to let go of your alambana. You can do this in several ways. If your alambana is Om or some other mantra, you can simply allow its repetition to come to an end. Or you can let it fade away gradually, like an echo reverberating in a mountain valley.
And that's what I was thinking of. And again, I guess this is what I kind of asked a little bit, or explained a little bit earlier about the and then just having that Of course, I have to perfect that. It being jagged is not really conducive to meditation, but then to just have that repeat in my mind and then eventually just kind of fade away in the distance.
The method I prefer is to allow the interval or gap between repetitions to grow longer and longer.
Wow.
Om, 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 Om. Eventually, the gap becomes so long that Om finally ceases to arise. Then the flow of identical vrittis comes to an end, and the practice of dhyana can effortlessly and seamlessly lead to the state of samadhi.
I can see how people with the spacing of the ohms still be distracted by it, because you're like, did I wait long enough? Do I need to say Om now? Or do I have to wait 2 more seconds? And let me go now. Om. 1 miss. 2 miss. 3. 4. 5. It's... You have to find out what method really works for you. So, and I was just thinking, it's like, well, that's not too bad, but then you start thinking, it's like, did I wait long enough? And it kind of defeats the purpose.
In that state, your mind is free from thoughts, emotions, and sensations. Also, the karta, the doer, the meditator, is no longer present. So then, what's left? Well, the second aspect of your ego, the bhokta, or experiencer, can still remain. To go beyond the 7th anga, dhyana, you have to drop your alambana. Then the momentum of your practice can carry you along into a state of utter silence, a state of blissful stillness or perfect peace. Yet, even in that state, a subtle vritti can still remain in your mind. The bhokta, or experiencer. When you feel, I experience silence, that feeling indicates the presence of the bhokta. Even after the karta, or meditator, disappears, the feeling of being an experiencer can linger. Fortunately, just like the feeling, I am meditating, eventually goes away, the feeling I experience silence can do likewise. Let me explain how. In the absence of vrittis, when your mind is utterly silent, there is nothing to be observed, nothing to experience. And when there's nothing to experience, there's no need for an experiencer. So, in the absence of anything to experience, the bhokta, the experiencer, can eventually disappear. Now, this explanation is extremely conceptual, so here's a more concrete example. If you meditate with your eyes half open while facing a blank wall, a strange experience often occurs. The wall will seem to grow darker, and after a while, you might not see anything at all. You can try this for yourself. Surprisingly, you can temporarily lose your power of sight when your eye stops sending new information to the visual cortex of your brain. Scientists call this the Gansfield effect. In a similar way, in the state of samadhi, where there's nothing to be experienced, the second aspect of your ego, the bhokta or experiencer, can temporarily disappear.
I gotta look that up.
For me, and maybe for other meditators as well, something amazing happens when the bhokta disappears. When it's present, you experience silence here and now, at the present moment. But in the absence of the bhokta, you'll no longer be aware of an experience of silence that's happening at a particular time and place. You'll actually cease to be aware of time and space altogether. Then, all that remains is infinite, boundaryless awareness, completely free from the limitations of time and space. But can you really experience timelessness? Well, how do you experience time? It's not a thing you can see, hear, taste, smell, or touch. Yet, your mind certainly senses the passage of time. But it senses time indirectly, based on how quickly vrittis come and go. For example, when your mind is racing and filled with vrittis, the time shown by a clock seems to slow down. Why? When vrittis come and go very rapidly, you experience more time than a clock does.
Here's an interesting one about clocks he's talking about that I found kind of strange. I believe I've heard this again. Supposedly true science. I think they brought a clock. They had the two exact same clocks. One that left on Earth, one that took up in space. Then the one that took up in space, they brought it back down. It was, I think, slower than the clock that stayed on Earth the entire time. It says time and space work a little bit differently based on gravity, I believe, or something like that. It was really strange. Maybe the gravity wasn't adding enough resistance to the clock. I don't know. I forget I don't know if there were analog clocks or digital clocks. I think it was digital though. But yeah, it's very interesting, and it just made me think, like, that's very interesting, like, depending on how fast you're going. Oh yeah, it was just the speed of how fast someone was going determines how long or short time is. It was something along those lines. It was very, very fascinating. But again, I haven't heard anything recent. I just remembered that, and I hope I run into more stuff like that. It's quite interesting.
On the other hand, when you're deeply relaxed and very few vrittis come and go, clock time seems to pass more quickly. That happens because when vrittis come and go very slowly, you experience less time than a clock does. And in samadhi, when there are no vrittis to come and go, you will not experience any time at all.
It's really weird when he says you experience more or less time than a clock does, even though technically speaking you experience the same amount of time. It's just the amount of experience that you have, I believe, the amount of experience you have within the time frame of 30 seconds or a minute is different than if you had very little thoughts, I suppose. But it's just a weird way of a weird way for him to phrase that. It just makes it seem like you can experience more or less time, even though technically speaking you're experiencing the same time, but it does feel different.
As a result, the time shown on a clock will seem to suddenly jump ahead. Now, let's look at this chart one last time to see what happens when you attain samadhi. While practicing dhyana, the first aspect of your ego, the karta, or doer, fades away. Then, after going beyond dhyana, by letting go of your alambana, your mind becomes completely free of vrittis, with the exception of the second aspect of your ego, the bhokta, experiencer. As we discussed before, the bhokta also fades away in the absence of anything to be experienced. Then what? Then, as Patanjali himself says, tada drashtuhu swarupe avasthanam. You then abide in your true nature as pure consciousness. That is the state of kaivalya, onlyness, when your true nature alone remains. Of course, the state of samadhi will eventually come to an end when the momentum created by intense practice gets completely exhausted. Then you can simply resume your deliberate, willful practice of dharana and dhyana to get reestablished in the state of samadhi. Now, we come to the end of this series of videos describing Patanjali's system of yogic meditation from the perspective of modern psychology. I've tried to explain everything as simply as possible. And to do so, I've omitted any discussion about the 10 different kinds of samadhi that Patanjali defines. It's important to note that these videos are based on my own experience of practicing yogic meditation. Other practitioners will very likely have different experiences, and possibly come to conclusions different from mine. The fact is, using an experiential approach like this has some shortcomings. To describe your experiences in meditation is like describing the flavor of a juicy, ripe mango. Words are no substitute for direct experience. Yet, I hope the words used here will encourage you to deepen your own practice of meditation.
The only reason I was laughing is because he talks about the mango, right? You can describe some things about it, but he's absolutely true in the fact that there's nothing. Oh my God! Actually, again, this came up before watching this video, I can't believe this. I was thinking about, I was going through my YouTube feed, right? And I saw this thing on my home feed saying restaurants in America that I've never heard of before. And one of them is A&W. I was like, A&W, and I just started thinking this in my head. A&W, I thought that was just a root beer, but I didn't realize it was a cafeteria first. And I started thinking, how do I describe root beer? Because it's like, well, root beer doesn't have any beer. It's non-alcoholic. It's sweet, but I was trying to think of how to describe it. It's like, well, it's a very unique flavor. It doesn't taste like Coke, or any of the other flavors. So it's like, well, you have to kind of try it. Literally what he just described. Wow, this is so weird. A lot of the things that I was thinking about before watching this video and during my YouTube, it happens in this video. That is coincidental. And again, like he's saying, this is very much an experiential. You have to experience it to know. It's very difficult to describe. You can describe some aspects of it, like root beer. I don't know if anyone's ever tried root beer. There's no alcohol in it. It's sweet. That's about it. You say, so it tastes like sugar? It's like, no, there's a taste to it. It's just, I don't know how to describe it. You have to experience it to know what it tastes like. And again, it's kind of strange. A lot of the things in this video literally happened to me and me thinking about it right before this video. I was not expecting that at all. Huh.
Perhaps the best advice I can leave you with is to suggest that meditation is a highly personal inner journey or exploration. The territory explored by every meditator is unique, and therefore every meditator has a unique path to follow. There's no single correct way to meditate. So it's best to experiment with various techniques to find out what works for you and incorporate it into your daily practice. In this way, meditation can lead you on a wonderful and rewarding spiritual journey.
Okay, I will say this. I really like the way he explained the things, because it's very simple how he explains them, and it makes me understand a lot better, especially with the example of the girl on the bike, the flow of time, how we experience it a little bit differently, and how, when you get really into something, you tend to so hyper focus on it that everything else just blanks out, and then when you're done with it, you're like, oh man, it's been an hour. I thought I was doing that only for 5 minutes. You have that experience where time is either flying, you're like, oh my gosh, I gotta hurry up and do this, and then you look at the time, it's like, oh my gosh, I thought I'd been working for 5 minutes only, it's been an hour. Or when you're playing and then all of a sudden, you experience like, oh man, this is so much fun. It feels like you only did it for 5 minutes, but it's been an hour. It's somehow the same results. You experience 5 minutes, but an hour flown. Oh, actually, there are some where, yeah, you're wanting time to fly. Like, oh my gosh, it feels like it's been 10 hours. 2 minutes. Kind of like that. So it's interesting that he incorporates that, because it's something that we all, I believe most of us has experienced. So it's a very, you can see how that effect of experiencing time can apply, something that we can experience, and the effect of hyper focus on a particular task that we do, where we focus on one thing and everything else gets blanked out. Again, something that most of us have experienced, and then repeating that process, because we experience it and we do it ourselves, it means it's very possible to do it. It's not something like I don't know how to explain. I guess like floating in air. I've never experienced floating on air, so to me that's not practical. I have no reference for that. Whereas daydreaming, wanting time to fly, wanting time to slow down. I've experienced that, and that's something that that he says that is possible to experience during these processes. I'm like, yeah, I've done that. Now, if I can control that, that's where it's at. So, anyways, more action, transcending the mind, abiding in pure awareness. If you like my content, please consider subscribing, thumbs up, and sound down below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next vid.